Okay, hello, hi everybody. Welcome back for another live stream with me, Lara Ryan. Today we are looking at IELTS writing task 1 for the academic IELTS test. So we're going to look at a graph and together we're going to construct the essay. As we are writing the essay, basically I'm going to get you to write each part of the essay, share what you've written with me in the comments. And then if you're making any mistakes, I'll point out what those mistakes are. And then, by learning what mistakes you're making, you can learn, from that, and you can improve your scores by either, not repeating those mistakes in some cases, or it might be, working on fixing your weaknesses. Maybe if it's something to do with grammar or vocab, where you'd actually need to take some time to actually improve. But either way, I'll be able to point out what problems you have. Once you understand your problems, then you can take action on fixing those things. As I am giving you feedback, I will take the writing of some students, I'll add it to the screen, and we'll construct a full essay together during the lesson. For those of you who don't know me, I've been an IELTS examiner for writing and speaking, and I've been teaching IELTS since 2010. So I have a lot of experience, and I'll be able to guide you and try and keep things as simple as possible. I think a lot of the problems with online resources is that they make things sound more complicated. What I like to do is try and keep it as simple as possible. Okay, so first thing we need to do is take a look at the question itself. So this is the question we're looking at today. It's quite basic. There are 4 categories. There's nothing really too complicated going on in any of them. Which is, it can be the case. There are times where you don't get many categories. And in situations like this, we're going to need to say, as much as we can about each category. There are times where we have lots of categories and we're trying to be very concise and just try and say everything as briefly as possible. But in the situation today, with this question, we've got plenty of time in 20 minutes to say everything we need to say. So this time we're going to try and be a bit more descriptive. Any extra things that we can think of saying, we're going to add them to the essay. We still want to write about 180 words. So what we're going to do more so in the body paragraphs when we're describing the key features is, we're going to mention everything that we need to say along the way. Ismail, hi Ismail. For those who don't know you well, Mr. Lara has been shining as an IELTS teacher exam for ages. Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind words, much appreciated. It's always nice to hear things like that. Okay, so to begin with, I want you all to please write the paraphrase for this question and share it with me in the comments. So just in case you don't know what that means, when we paraphrase the question, we're taking that little sentence at the top and we want to rewrite that in our own words. So the question says, the chart below shows the average money spent per customer on various types of equipment in a Canadian sports store. Rewrite that in your own words. One thing I would say where students go wrong is they try to change too many things. I'd say keep it simple. Look, the question says the chart below shows. So we're going to say, for example, the graph illustrates. Now take the next bit. So the average money spent, just try to paraphrase that bit and then try to paraphrase the next bit and the next bit. There will be some words that you don't know how to change. That's not a big problem. Just copy the words you don't know how to change the ones you can change, copy the ones you can't change. The main goal is that your paraphrase has the same meaning and it's clear. After that, the second or those would be the 2 most important things. The third thing is changing the words. So a lot of people misunderstand that and they think that changing the words is the most important thing. It's not. Having a paraphrase that has the correct meaning, the same meaning, and it's clear and easy to understand. Those are the 2 most important things. And of course, if you can change more words, that's better. The more words you can change, the better. But everybody is going to be limited by the range of vocabulary that they know. So there will be some words you can change, great. Some you can't, no problem. Okay, so I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes. I want you to paraphrase that question, share it with me in the comments, and I'll give you all feedback then on the any mistakes you're making, and we'll take it from there. Okay, first one in here from Ismail. The given line chart illustrates how much money spent for each customer. So you're mixing up a passive structure and an active structure. So it's how much money was spent by each customer if you want to go with a passive structure, or we can go how much money each customer spent. Just keep it active, keep it simple like that. Probably the best thing to do. Through different kinds of equipment. So to spend money on something, that's a collocation. We cannot change that. That's fixed. Spend money on different kinds of equipment. Yes, in a sporting shop in Canada. Okay, great. This is very good. So just a few small grammar mistakes that we're going to have to fix, but everything else looks good. So give me a moment. I'm going to copy that and paste it into this onto the screen here. Okay, so what we have then is the given line chart illustrates how much money, and we said we're just going to do it in an active structure, how much money each customer spent, and to spend money on something. It's always a fixed phrase like that. Spent on different kinds of equipment in a sporting shop in Canada. Perfect. Okay, so we have exactly what we need there. We have paraphrased the question. There were some words that we needed to copy, no problem. There were some words that we were able to change, so we did that. Focusing mainly on having the same meaning and being clear. And both of those were true, but we did need to change some of the grammar and the vocab collocations just a little bit. So small mistakes in vocab and grammar, but in terms of task achievement and coherence and cohesion, this is a really strong paraphrase. Okay. So next then we need to write the overview. I'm not going to tell you how to do that just yet. I'm going to let you do it yourselves first because you'll learn more from any mistakes that you make. So I'll let you write the overview. If there are any mistakes, I'll point them out and I'll explain a little bit more about how to write an overview after that as well. Okay, so again, I'll give you, let's say, 3 minutes. I want you to write the overview for this question on the screen, share it with me in the comments, and then I'll have feedback for you guys then. Okay, so Ismail is in here already. Okay. Overall, the costs of the 4 sports followed contrasting trends. That type of sentence doesn't really help with the task achievement score. So they followed contrasting trends. You're not really saying what happened. And the problem then, it's not actually going to reduce your score to say that, but the problem is that it's not improving your score either. We only have 20 minutes to write the essay. So really what's happening with that sentence is that you're losing time is the problem. So rather than saying that, let's just jump into straight into what happened. So I'd just go, overall, football was consistently the most expensive in most years. No. So it was the consistently means always, and then in most years means not always. I mean, football, if you want to talk about the highest and lowest, you could say it was highest at the start, and you could say it was highest at the end, but it wasn't always highest. So it's not really a great description to say it was nearly always highest, and it wasn't, I mean, a little bit more than half the time, but we wouldn't say all the time. So maybe pointing out the start and the end if you want to talk about it being highest. In most years, while swimming remained the least costly until 2020. So that then is swimming was what, green? So what you meant was least costly until 2010. Additionally, tennis experienced a significant decline in cost, which contrasted with the upward trend seen in swimming. So you see, the thing is, we have two ways to analyze the categories. We can talk about which ones are highest and lowest, and we can talk about which ones increased and decreased. But normally we would apply the same to every one of them. But what you've done is you've talked about which one was highest most of the time, which one was lowest half the time. Then for the other two categories, which ones increased and which ones decreased. It's becoming too complicated. Now, what I would say is this. There are two types of chart. There are static charts and dynamic charts. And when it comes to this chart, it's got more than 1 point. Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my marker here. It's got more than 1 year. We have 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2020. So what that means is that it's dynamic. Okay, we call that a dynamic chart. And simple as this, whenever it's dynamic, the easiest thing to do is talk about which ones increased and which ones decreased. So if we look at the first one here, rugby, it went up and then it went down. Don't worry too much about that. Just compare the start with the end. So overall, we can call that a decrease. Okay. Football was an increase, tennis was a decrease, and swimming was an increase. Now, for every dynamic chart, that's going to be the easiest thing to do. So if you just mention those things first, and then if it's a bit too short, we might add something extra. But the problem is when you're trying to talk about highest and lowest, and you're trying to say football was highest, but it wasn't always highest, swimming is lowest, but it was only lowest for the first half, it becomes more complicated. Whereas just saying the increases and decreases first will always be a less complicated way to go about it. Koala, the line graph illustrates the average spending by each customer on different kinds of equipment in a Canadian sports store. Yeah, very strong. Good paraphrase, well done. Okay, so another one from Ismail. Overall, football and swimming equipment saw an upward trend in expenditure. No, in sales. Expenditure is how much money you're spending, like how much the shop would be spending on that equipment, when they're buying it, when the shop is buying it, but not how much the customers are spending. Over the 20-year period, while tennis and rugby experienced an overall decline despite some fluctuations. And football remained the category with the highest spending for the majority of the period. Again, I would rephrase that, but yeah, we're on track now. Okay, so let me just grab that one again. I'm not going to include the football part just yet. Okay, so what we're going to do first is, let me just paste that much in there. Okay, overall, football and swimming equipment saw an upward trend in sales over the 20-year period. So football and swimming, yeah, that's correct. While tennis and rugby experienced an overall decline. While tennis and rugby experienced an overall decline. So it's overall declines. So it's one decline each. Overall declines despite some fluctuations. So actually, when we come back to the football and swimming equipment, it shouldn't be an upward trend. Football had an upward trend and swimming had an upward trend. So we need plurals there. So upward trends. Now, the last thing we need to talk about is where you've said despite some fluctuations. Well, that's not really true for tennis. So tennis decreased with no fluctuations. Rugby decreased and it did have a fluctuation. So you can say that for rugby, that it had a fluctuation, but you can't say that for tennis. So when you say this here, that applies to tennis and rugby. So now that becomes incorrect. Inaccurate information like that can reduce your task achievement score. In fact, it definitely would. So we're going to have to remove that. We cannot say that because it doesn't apply to both of them. Okay, so what we're going to just do is that overall football and swimming equipment saw upward trends in sales over the 20-year period, while tennis and rugby experienced overall declines. Good. Okay, so that's like 21 words. Okay, so in general, and this isn't a requirement of the IELTS test, but what I would say is in general, try to write about 30 words in your overview. So when it's a dynamic chart like this, talk about which ones increased and decreased first. If that's about 30 words long, we're good. Leave it at that. If that's shorter, like significantly shorter, like here, we only have 20 words, try to say something extra. Now, Ismail, what you've been saying is football remained the category with the highest spending for the majority of the period. That's not really that clear for the majority of the period. So what we're going to do is, like I said earlier, let's just take the start and the end. Let me see, what was your wording? You said at the start and end of the period, football had the highest figures. Okay, so something like that there. So that then is an easier way of saying, like adding that extra information without making it vague or unclear or whatever like that. So that there, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that there. Okay, good. So that is our first paragraph finished. We paraphrased the question, we wrote the overview. Now, what we need to do next is we need to write about the specific. We need to write about the we need to write the body paragraphs where we talk about the specific key features for the individual categories. Now, in this question, there are 2 that increased and 2 that decreased. So it would make sense to discuss. It would make sense to discuss the 2 increases in one paragraph and the 2 decreases in the other. Okay, so for now, let's start with our description of, let's say, football. Okay, so that's my next task for you guys there. I want you to write the description of football. Like before, share that with me in the comments. I'll tell you if you're doing anything wrong, and then we'll put an example on the screen. Okay, so we have some other comments here that I haven't looked at yet. Lua. Overall, so you're making straight away, I see 3 punctuation mistakes. The capital letter at the start of the sentence, overall, full stop at the end of the sentence. And after the comma, we need a space. So it's overall capital letter, comma, space. While money spent on football and swimming equipment are increasing, it has to be in the past. It's past tense, so it increased. And then another comma, because you're separating those with the word while. So while these ones increased, comma, tennis and rugby, in contrast, decreased significantly. I don't think they decreased significantly, so that would be inaccurate. I mean, maybe tennis decreased significantly, but not rugby. So we can't say that they both decreased significantly, you just say they both decreased. Or if you want to separate, you can say tennis decreased and rugby decreased, or rugby decreased and tennis decreased significantly. If you want to add significantly, you have to separate them. You can't say significantly when it applies to both of them if it only applies to one. That's inaccurate. And one more thing, you've used the word while, so you have that cohesive device, and you've also added in contrast. it's too much. That's overuse, and that would affect your coherence and cohesion score. Overuse of cohesive devices is not good for your coherence and cohesion score. So you already had while that already did what it needed to do. You don't want to add anything extra on top of that. Okay, koala. Overall, the money spent on rugby and tennis saw a downward trend, and then comma, while the figures for football and swimming rose over the period. Yep, good. Again, now that would be a bit short. So that's the most important information done. And then, like we have on the screen here, you can add something like at the start and the end of the period, football had the highest figures. Okay, so here we have a description for football. Regarding football, spending started at $60 in 2000. Good. Before dipping to a low of $40 in 2010. Good. However, it recovered significantly thereafter, surging to a peak of $70 in 2020. Okay, there's just one mistake with that, but let me take that first. I'll come back to the bit on swimming later. I'll give that as a task in a minute. Okay, so here we're moving on to body paragraph 1. So regarding football, spending started at $60 in 2000 before dipping to a low of $40 in 2010. Good. However, it recovered significantly thereafter, surging to a peak of $70 in 2010. So when we're using by, it will have to be past perfect. In this situation, we're using present simple or past simple, so we need to use in 2010. Whereas by 2020 was describing what happened before 2020, in which case you'd need to use past perfect. But one thing here is a peak. Now, if we look at the question here, if you look at rugby, this is a peak. So a peak is where it goes up and then it comes down again. So the peak is like that high bit there. So it has to be, it has to go up and come down again before we can call it a peak. But what we see for here, what you're describing as a peak isn't a peak. So you're calling this a peak. It's the highest point, yes, but it's not a peak. It's only a peak when it comes back down again. But we don't know what happened next, so you can't call that a peak. So that vocabulary is wrong there. So let me just change that. It recovered significantly after surging to maybe like the highest value on the chart to the highest value on the chart of $70 in 2010. Okay. Right. So from there, we will move on to swimming. Swimming is the other one that increased, so it makes sense to put those together. So that's my next task for you guys there. Write a description, the description of swimming. Share it with me in the comments. And as usual, I'll have some feedback for you guys about that. Ismail has actually written a description of swimming already, so we can see it at the end there. Swimming gear, which initially had the lowest expenditure at just $10. Yep. Showed a steady and consistent increase, tripling its value to reach $30 at the end of the period. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. Good. Okay, so again, let me just grab that and we'll copy and paste it. There isn't really anything to do with that. And like I said earlier, the problem we have here is that there isn't that much to talk about when these graphs have only 4 categories, and they're pretty much straight lines for most of it. So adding in something there like the fact that it tripled, that's a nice way just to make sure that we don't end up with a very short essay. Like normally there's no need for something like that, tripling its value like that type of information. It's not a strict requirement or necessity for the for a good score, but in this situation it's good to just add that extra little detail to avoid ending up with a short answer. Let me just read it again. Gear is actually informal. It's a suitable word in terms of it's a good paraphrase, but it's actually an informal word. So I'm gonna remove that for now. Okay. So swimming equipment, which initially had the lowest expenditure at just $10, showed a steady and consistent increase, tripling its value to reach $30 at the end of the period. Yeah, really strong. Like nice use of complex structures. You're using cohesive devices, but not in a way that's like, you're not overusing them. You're using them accurately. The grammar, the vocab, everything is there. That's like a really, really nice piece of writing there, and a good, clear and accurate description. So essentially, you're doing everything you need to do. I'm running out of space here. I need to make myself a bit smaller. Okay. So that's the first body paragraph finished. We haven't included too much data. One thing I was worried about were like some people, when they see there isn't much to say, they'll start adding extra things in. They'll start talking about where the different lines cross with one another, or they'll just mention every year for every category, which isn't the right thing to do. We still need to just talk about the key features, which is exactly what you see here, mentioning the start and the end, and then any significant turns. Even with football, there's a small little bend in the line in 2015. It's not really worth mentioning. So it's just the start, the end, and any more significant turns. Okay, so that then brings us to the final body paragraph. I think it makes sense to start with rugby. So that's my next task for you guys there. Write a description of rugby, share it with me in the comments, and like before, I'll give you feedback and point out any mistakes. And then again, I'll take an example and add it to the screen as well. Koala, customer spends $60 on football equipment in 2000. 60 in 2000, good. Now you have a punctuation mistake here. You said comma, the spending on it. So is this a new sentence? You have a comma, makes it look like it's the same sentence, but you have a capital letter on the, makes it look like it's a new sentence. So there's something wrong there. Maybe a full stop. The spending on it. Maybe the spending on this category. Continued declining. You cannot say it continued declining because it wasn't declining before that. So you'd have to say the spending on this category declined to $40 in 2010 before a considerable increase of 60. No, not of 60. So if it was of 60, it would be the size of the increase. So then it was 40, and an increase of 60 means 40 plus 60. So it went up to 100, which isn't true. So it'd have to be an increase of, where did it go, to 70? So 40, 50, 60, 70, so 30. It would have to be a considerable increase of 30 or a considerable increase to $70. What? I'm confused. Before a considerable increase of $60 in 2010 and a high of 70. I'm just confused actually what you've done there. I think maybe you sent it before you were finished writing it. There's a bit of a mix up on that. But you already described $40 in 2010. The next step is what happened in 2020, not looping back to 2010 again or giving a second description. Move forward from there. Okay, and Ismail has the description of rugby. Ismail, you've been doing a really solid job this far. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to directly copy and paste it, and I'll just talk about it directly on the page, on the document on the screen. Okay. So here's our description of rugby. Okay, give me a second just to tidy up the screen here. Okay, that should be all right. Yeah, that's all lined up okay. Okay. In contrast, expenditure on rugby equipment followed a more volatile path. A more volatile path than what? Then, because it's a new paragraph, so are we saying a more volatile path than the ones in the previous paragraph, or just a more volatile path than swimming? So I think the fact that it's in another paragraph means we're comparing what's in this paragraph with what's in the other one. So we can't really point that out. No, the difference is that it decreased rather than it. The previous category, tennis, was a straight line, and this one isn't a straight line, because we're not comparing the categories inside the same paragraph. We're comparing what was in the previous one with the previous two categories in the previous paragraph with the two in this one. So that in contrast doesn't work here. And the thing is, when we say in contrast, we have to say like those ones increased, in contrast this one decreased. But by the time we get to the decrease, that's down here. So in contrast, maybe like rugby had an overall decline in sales. Just to make it clear, what is the contrast first, because we said in contrast, and then we have to say what are we contrasting? It's the fact that this one declined. As expenditure on this type of equipment rose from $40 in 2000 to reach a peak of $60 in 2010. Yes, and this is a peak this time, so 40 to 60. Good. Matching football's initial figure. No, because it's so long ago when you talked about football that the reader isn't going to remember that. And is that important? It's not really like that. When the question says make comparisons where relevant, like up here it says make comparisons where relevant, that's not relevant. Like why does it matter? Like 10 years previously a different category was also 60. That's not really a necessary comparison. I think like maybe becoming higher than football, becoming higher than, or maybe like surpassing football to become the highest category. We can say that before falling sharply to end at $30 in 2010. Okay, so mainly what we're looking at then is things related to coherence and cohesion. So you said in contrast, well, what is the contrast? What are you pointing out? So make that clearer. And then when you want to make a comparison, you're trying to compare this category in 2010 with a different category in 2000. They were both 60. Well, why? It's not really clear why that's important. Whereas saying it became the highest, that, you know, that it makes more sense for us to point that out. So that's just kind of a more obvious thing to highlight. Okay, so we have one category left. Ismail, I have a feeling you're done with that already. I think you're patiently waiting for me to move on. Ah, there it is, jumped in. I have another student to look at first. Give me one moment and then I'll get to that. So our last category is what? Tennis. Okay. All right. So again, write your descriptions of tennis, share that with me in the comments, and I'll have some feedback for you. Okay, Koala. The spending on swimming equipment stood at only $10 in 2000. So swimming, $10 in 2000. Good. However, the figure gradually grew from 20 in 2010. No. So what you've done here is, think of it this way, right? let me just go here. So what you've done is you said it was here, and then it grew from here to here. And there's this bit that you just jumped over. So typically what we'll do is we'll talk about what happened in 2010 and then say what happened in 2000. And then you say, and after that, it increased to this figure in 2010. And from there, it continued to this figure in 2020. Now, the problem with that is you jump that bit. So it's like you've given us this part of the story, and then the next bit starts here. Instead of transitioning from here to here, you've just jumped straight across. And then we get this bit. So there's this kind of a blank space in your description. Another problem then is with a category like this, it's just a straight line all the way. We don't really need to mention the one in the middle. Like if you give me the first one and the last one, I already know that it went from there to there. So adding that extra one in the middle or adding any of the other points in the middle, they don't give me extra information, because by giving me the first and the last, I have all that information already. So we wouldn't actually include 2010 for this one, because it's just a straight line from the start to the end. So the spending on swimming equipment stood at only $10 in 2000. However, the figure gradually grew, and then we just grew to $30 in the final year. It would be a bit short. We're looking to be a bit more descriptive, so that we don't end up with a very short answer, but not being more descriptive by adding in unnecessary key features or unnecessary points on the chart. More like what we had in the previous answer. Okay, and then Ismail, I believe you've written the full essay. I think everything on the screen is your work. All right, so this is the last bit here. Tennis. I'm going to have to make this all a bit smaller now. Just give me a moment to get myself organized here. Okay. Okay, so tennis witnessed a gradual but continuous decline throughout the 2 decades, starting at $30 and eventually dropping to 10. So starting at 30 and dropping to 10. Good. Making it the least funded category. No, funded would be like, if it's a charity and people are giving money to the charity, that would be fun. That would be funding. This isn't here. Making it the least popular category, let's say. Like that. That works. All right. Excellent. So that's our full essay. We don't need anything else. We don't need a paraphrase. We don't need a summary. We don't need anything else. We've done it all. Okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking everything we've written and I'm going to try and put it all on the same page just so you guys can see it all together. All right. So I know this is a little bit messy the way I'm doing this, so bear with me. If I can get it all on the same page just to give you an idea of what that would look like on its own. Okay. So that then is our full essay. And that's a good essay too. We have everything we need there. Okay. Oh, it's just trying to get it to line up so we can see everything at the same time. We're doing the task 1 live streams because it's hard to get everything on the page together with the question and the writing. There isn't much space left. Good, we have it. All right. So that there is the full essay. Hopefully you've learned something about how to write those essays, but also, from the feedback I've given you, you've learned a little bit about, what types of mistakes you're making, how to avoid those mistakes, what you need to do differently. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we'll finish up there. We'll be back next week. I'll do another live stream based on another part of the IELTS test. It won't be task 1 again, or at least it won't be task 1 academic again. Thanks, Koala. And yeah, so see you all next week. Good work from everyone, and take care of yourselves.